that's a good person to be mistaken for. All right, great. Well, thank you all. I'm going to be very quick and give you some updates because we have had some really exciting things going on. The main thing for me personally has been this series of meetings that I think I characterize as integration and orientation, and starting with orientation and really trying to understand the lay of the land and get a great sense of with whom we will be coordinating. And as we start to think about exciting ideas to advance sustainability, be sure that we're not doing things that have been done before, or if we are, acknowledge it and say how we think it's different, and be certain that we're talking to all the right people, because there are incredible pockets of people doing amazing stuff across the university. And what we're trying to do is integrate and synergize and synthesize rather than ever replicate. But that's a tall order, but I had a bunch of great meetings since we last met, including a ton with the Energy Services Group, who has been so helpful. That was a primary connection for the previous sustainability efforts. And so that was a great place to start. Luke Kellogg in particular has been super helpful for me, both in terms of specific topics and in terms of helping me get oriented. So I've met with a lot of them recently and have been working with Adam Long in the very recent days on some ideas around carbon neutrality and greenhouse gases for the university, which will be really exciting and we'll be ready to share soon. I was happy to be able to have time with Vice Provost Elaine Westbrooks, who we talked about the library and its 1 million square feet and its important role in our function and in turn in our greenhouse gas budget. And she is excited to partner with us and excited for folks from the libraries to integrate as we begin to flesh out the committees, which we'll talk about later. I've talked to a great number of individual students and student groups, and that has been fantastic. I will say that Venela and Nathaniel did an amazing job getting their coalition together in short order. I went and met with that group, I believe maybe it was August, it could have been possibly September, but early on in the semester, and I know they've carried on their monthly meetings. And that, I think, is going to be a really, really valuable tool as we move forward to keep everybody in the same information space and to make sure that we're getting all the good ideas shared with everyone. And so I'm excited about that. I look forward to thinking through, obviously we don't want to burden it with a ton of mechanics, but having it be organized in a way so that we assure that not only do they talk about exciting, neat stuff, but that we assure that there's integration back to this group so that we can have that conduit for information that feels like it was lacking in the recent past. So that's one thing we can talk and think a little bit about. I had a great meeting with Carolina Dining Services, who I know many of you have been directly connected with. I learned a ton in that regard about the nature of the contracts with the folks who provide the services and the strengths and weaknesses or the challenges and opportunities that those arrangements present, and just got a general enthusiasm from them for partnering. And it felt super positive and was not terrifically surprising given the neat work that Elizabeth and others have done in the recent past and in the distant past. But it was, it was at once, a lot of these meetings, I feel like they're about specific topics. So we talked a lot about composting, and we talked a lot about behavior and how that shapes whether composting works, something that Jeff Middlestad and I have talked a bunch about. And then once you compost, where's it gonna go? And the catch-22, I guess, of when do you start using compostable things? Is it because you think they're better than plastic, or is it when you're assured that you have the final fate of the material taken care of? So some of those were fairly specific conversations, but I think that they could generally be described as really enthusiastic to partner and really interested in exchanges with this group. So I think that was a very positive meeting as well. I also met for quite a while with Evan Yaski, who is the university architect, and learned from him generally some of the challenges that are faced around building design and renovation, and how we might do a better job of thinking about sustainability on the front end. Because obviously those big projects, those big capital projects are an opportunity, and we need to be certain that our guidance and policies at the university level not only reflect to others what our goals are, but also allow people to understand, to benefit from all the past experiences and see how individual projects, while we want everyone to be aspirational and say we're going to be zero carbon, try and do it in a way that benefits from perhaps scale that we have in other areas where we're pursuing similar goals, but also so that we're talking about things like carbon neutrality in the same way across the university. But really exciting, and there's, I think, quite a bit to be done, but quite a bit of opportunity immediately. And so largely through Jeff Middlestad, we've been engaged in the business schools. Is it an addition, Jeff? Is that how they're describing it? But
yeah, it's an addition, although we're also doing renovations in the existing building.
Got it. So it's a giant project, but that's like one of the big things going on, and is a really interesting opportunity to think both specifically about how can that project be as good as it possibly can be, and more generally, how can it inform guidance and policies that we put forth to help the university as a whole, and to try and help the university's goals be a little coherent. But that's, I think it's really exciting to have made all those connections now, and it's great to have Jeff heavily involved in that process. So we're going to continue talking, have been, I think we were emailing today, so that's timely communication, but that one has been a great connection as well. I've also had lots of external inquiries. I met with the East Chapel Hill Rotary Club, who were awesome, and talked to them about projects they were doing, and learned a lot. I knew a little bit about the Rotary, but just the philosophy of building transferable project types was really appealing. We had a couple of logistical challenges, but at some point in the fairly near future, I'm going to circle back with them, because they have something called the Green Team that they're doing sustainability work throughout Chapel Hill. And as I said, trying to spin it off and have it be scalable and transferable things. So that was good. Let's see, I met with Mayor Pam Heminger of Chapel Hill and had a great meeting. Expressed just a broad, she was really interested in the things that we had in mind, the approaches we were taking, and ways in which we could integrate at all levels with Chapel Hill. Obviously, there are lots of great connections between lots of groups working in more specific areas in the town of Chapel Hill, but around sustainability, we were talking about opportunities to look for big, broad projects of mutual benefit and not miss any opportunities where there may be benefits from collaboration. So we talked some about opportunities that may exist with composting. And so who knows? It's just with having, when you take the university and town of Chapel Hill together, it goes up another notch in terms of the size and volume of things. I don't have to tell you guys that. So that was a great meeting. I met with OWASA a couple of times, which has been really interesting, and beginning to try and understand our interfaces with OWASA, the sort of the utility providers, OWASA and Duke Energy. That was great. I learned a lot about the reused water programs and the inextricable link to the university as far as that goes, and thinking about their constant cycle of reassessment and reinvestment. And that's one where on a scale of 1 to 10, I think I'm about a 2 or 3 in terms of catching up with the process. But I will go to the quarterly meetings now. And so I think pretty quickly, hopefully I'll have a sense of that, because that's obviously a really, really important partnership. I had a great meeting with Amazon Business, and that was a really interesting conversation around sustainability opportunities in places where they may not necessarily at first feel as though that's the primary thing that exists in a relationship, but we just talked a lot through about what, I think it was maybe last year, the university switched to being an Amazon Business member, and the idea, all the challenges around multiple orders from individual people and individual trucks, bringing those individual orders, moving to this centralized system, but that, nothing's going to be perfect, but in a lot of ways, it seems to have had some quantified improvements. So with Amazon also beginning a climate, I think it's climate friendly, it's climate something positive labeling, that may be able to be something that we can incorporate into ideas that we set out in terms of assessment. The other thing, of course, is that Amazon is a data-rich organization, and so it will give us access to a lot of data, at least around those suite of purchases. Then the final one I'll talk about is circling back to Nathaniel and MC's focus on renewable energy. This is something that I've talked with Venela and with Nathaniel about in the beginning of the year, is within House Bill 589, there's something called the Green Source Advantage, which is a way that big organizations like UNC schools should be able to acquire renewable energy. And as it's worked so far, none of the UNC system schools have been able to participate. And so one of the things I talked to a handful of you about quite a bit, and that we're really fortunate to have some advocates who are alum who reached out to me and sort of laid out the possibility for an opportunity. We were able to have a series of meetings at different levels, ending with a meeting in which we were told, please go ahead and try and find a way to make this program work for UNC. So that is just the starting line, but it was a long and winding trip to the starting line. So I am exceptionally excited to give it a shot. And it's gonna happen pretty fast. And if it does happen, it'll be a really wonderful thing. You may have read about Duke University recently participating in the GSA and having an appreciable amount of their supplied power from Duke Energy all of a sudden become wholly renewable, which is great. It would knock out about 20% of our greenhouse gas emissions like that. So fingers crossed, and I'll definitely keep you all apprised, and I've been talking with some of you a great deal about it. But that is, I think, just an overall, I guess one more thing is that when we started and when the chancellor charged us, we were told that our group was advising his cabinet. So in the meantime, I have now become a member of his cabinet, which I think is pretty exciting for sustainability. So I don't know how, I'm not well practiced at representing all of our best interests yet at the table, but it's exciting to be there and to hear what's happening. And I think it is wholly reflective of his support for this group and for this idea. So I'm looking forward to that. It's been very interesting so far. That is what I have got. And I think now would be a good time if people have updates that they would like to provide. It would be great. Otherwise, we can circle back to them later on. We should have some time on the back end.
Just quick, you had talked about the buildings briefly, is that we are including and incorporating the 3 zeros into our overall strategy for the addition part of the building. And so our aim is for it to be, for us to, at least in that building, provide an example of how we might be able to move forward with the 3 zeros on a hopefully more than a building by building basis. But yeah, so I'll be happy to share ideas from that and places where if we could incorporate it into our behavior across campus, it would be easier for each renovation or new project moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely the case. And if there are others who'd like to take part in those conversations, please just let me know, because Evan and Jeff and I are connected, and I've been working with Adam Long a little bit in the recent past. And I think we're at a point now where we have that exciting intersection of one really great opportunity in the business school being willing to step up and invest in carbon neutrality at the building level, but also have maybe a window to have it push at the university level to have something more consistent for guidance and policy that embraces individual projects, but also keeps this coherent version of what carbon neutrality looks like. So that's awesome. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. All right, well, if there are no others, it's not your last chance, so we can do that later on. So we have minutes from the last meeting, and we're not too formal around here, but if people have comments on the minutes, little things, you can speak up. Bigger things, you can send me changes. But if people don't have comments, we could affirm them by not disapproving them. Anyone who would like to speak about the minutes or pretty comfortable with them? All right, so unless I hear otherwise, we will approve the minutes pending last minute today notes to me to change them. All right, awesome. So I did that a little bit out of order, but we are now through welcome and introductions. We've got the minutes approved and I have done my report. The next thing that we have on the docket is talking about the Sustainable Carolina document that should be in the team thing. And I'm sorry for those of you who didn't use Teams. I thought that we had all been forced to use Teams, but we can evolve into our interactive platform of choice as we go. But that is the one that I knew how to set up easily overnight. So the document is there. As we talked about last time, what this document is most of the information that was going to be in a 3.0's update that was scheduled to be released before any of the recent changes took place with my moving into this position and you all forming this council. So what we'd like to do is early in 21, what I'd like to do early in 21 is to release an update document that reflects our intentions going forward and that we feel is the document that we want out there to be our sort of philosophical rock and also to be our 5-year roadmap loosely. So if people have reactions, and this was, I think, Aaron Salzberg's really good suggestion last time, was that it was a good phase process where everybody looks at it, then we talk about edits, then we make the edits, and then we all agree on the edits, which I think is an important set of steps. So today is step 1.5, which is you're familiar with it and we can have some conversation about reactions, both general and specific, and begin to make some notes, and then our internal group will work a little and then share a revised document. So I'll open it up to reactions at this point. I'll start. So I think that I want it to be exciting and punchy and pithy. And I think that we can do some work to move in that direction. I don't think it's in this particular draft, but there is Adam Long in Energy Services put together a really great 1-page summary of our greenhouse gas current status and past efforts that we shared with the town of Chapel Hill for their climate action plan. And I think something like that, a 1-page kind of looks like the old school Sports Illustrated by the numbers, would be great to kick off each of the sections, just to make sure that it is accessible as well as comprehensive. So that was one thing that I was thinking, was to reach out and find the right folks, or to do it ourselves and think about what a water analog would look like, and to think about what a waste analog would look like. And perhaps, and I don't know, maybe I'll just throw this out there. Do we want to broaden? We're going to Sustainability Carolina. We are retaining those goals that are in 3.0s as our aspirational core goals, but it is an opportunity to think about other frameworks. If we want to think about sustainable development goals, if we want to have something broader to map to, I'm totally good with that if others feel like that's a good idea.
I think the sustainable development goals is a great idea. We've been using that more and more in all of our courses and our work at the center as well. I think it's another way to engage more people and to see how it's connected to them, because the 17 goals they seem broad from the outside looking in, but as you dig down into them, there's a lot of overlap and a lot of opportunity created by looking at all of them instead of just one individually.
I think I agree. I like the idea of kind of developing a broad conception of what we mean by sustainability and how it, I think in our last meeting, I can't claim to be super familiar with this document while I've been picking up the shattered pieces of my life from the semester. But just looking through, I feel like in our last meeting, we were asking the question about the extent to which we saw what's the relationship to this next step to the 3.0's roadmap. And I think we do have an opportunity to get something like this. Maybe it's not the SDGs specifically, but to get this kind of integrated human environment to really try to work on breaking down the divide between what people do and what the environment is, in order to capture the kind of work that's going on campus, and to really think systematically about who's affected differentially. So I think that would be a really exciting opportunity that kind of opens the 3.0's concept a bit more. But yeah, thank you so much for all of the work to put this together. Just scanning through, it's really interesting to see that background work that I haven't been familiar with.
And a lot of that, I will say, is a result of other people's efforts. So we started with a draft that's largely been developed by others. So full credit to a team of experts who I can't identify necessarily by name, but they did. I agree. It's a nice comprehensive start. Now I think the issue is framing and definitions, as you point out. So Elizabeth, do you have, like, when you said not necessarily SDG, is that because you don't necessarily gravitate that way, or is it just offering a broader range of possible solutions?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a longer conversation. I teach about the SDGs in my courses. And so I think it's really interesting to think about like the shift into the idea of sustainable development goals from previous development objectives at the UN and the global level. I think it opens a little bit of a Pandora's box because there are 17 of them because of the way that they're organized around, like, oh my gosh, goals, indicators. So like, does that mean that we mirror the same structure and the same approach? Is it that we're drawing on their principles? So I think that, there's 17 of them. There's the question of how do you deal with public-private partner, all of these things. So I guess it's a question of what it offers a lot of opportunity, I think, to open beyond thinking about the environment as a thing that's out there that we try to protect and conserve, and we are universal. So I think we just have to think through what elements of that format are useful for our purposes, right? Those are for the purposes of international coordination. Right. And so we might be able to pull some things from them, but not necessarily just sort of adopt them.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yes, very useful. Thank you. I think I get it.
And also, I really love, Mike, the idea of being able to have that synthesis document that's sort of an executive summary that people can refer to. I think that's really
and I think at every level, I think we need an overall synthesis document, and then we need synthesis documents for whatever the major topical sections end up being, so that it can all be extracted as up to 5 one-pagers, but preferably 4.
Yeah. I mean, and I think also one of the risks with taking on a sustainable development goal approach is those processes are getting so bogged down in metrics. And I think what's so exciting about this opportunity is that we can be mobilizing to actually do these projects and implement them and be really focused on that. And that seems exciting too.
Got it. So maybe use SDG and other frameworks as we're not just about greenhouse gases, water, and waste. We consider broader things and benefit from them in principle, but not get bogged down in practice where we're trying to do the multiple stepwise levels of activities. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are more general frameworks around sustainable development that you can use rather than just the SDGs. And there's so much baggage with the SDGs, and you'd have to explain so much. I'm not sure that's, I kind of like just sticking with the 3 pillars of social, economic, environmental, and those are the 3 pillars of sustainable development. And those are the factors that we're going to be thinking about as we develop these kinds of initiatives in terms of how we become not just more efficient, but how do we achieve equity and the distribution of the benefits.
Thanks, Aaron. That's great.
I was going to chime in. So we did a report focused around SDG for clean water and sanitation, and it was a really helpful practice for us because we don't usually use those at the Environmental Finance Center. It was really helpful to kind of think of things in a different way, looking at the access issues, and we were able to think about, an expensive bill can be as much of an impediment to access to clean water as a leaky pipe or a contaminated well. And so there's a really interesting way to bring in the concept or what is really grabbable about the SDG goals and think about it, but maybe using something a little bit like Aaron was saying, that's less complicated. But the other thing is, when I look at the document overall, I think it's just really the things that we find to be most effective that we put out are just really condensed and have that. I know you're saying punchy, but it seems to be as much about showing what we've done and much less about where we need to go. And I think we want it to be the reverse and kind of think about infographics or tables or really nicely summed up explanations of like, yeah, we did this amazing program with OWASA for reuse. Now here's how we're going to expand it, or focus on what's next. And then in that what's next, we have the opportunity to really focus on how are we going to bring in sort of environmental justice kind of issues or questions of equity and those sorts of things. So that's what, I mean, again, I haven't had a time to dig into it either as much, but I will. But from one look over it, it looks much more like a long narrative of our history. So just some initial thoughts.
Absolutely.
Just to like echo kind of that idea that Elizabeth was getting at earlier as well, with the kind of larger goals and the environment as something that's outside of us and is like out there, and kind of similar to what you're saying, Erin, just about people not always being receptive to the history in the past. I think something that MC and I have been trying to do this semester is reframe student government's approach to a lot of these issues, because we found that we keep running into brick walls. And the reason being is that we've, like, to a certain extent, done most of the work from a logistical standpoint of student sustainability. And the problem is that students don't buy in. And so we've kind of reframed our approach to a lot of things as getting students who don't care to care. And I think that's something else to keep in mind as well. Like, when we want to put out a punchy initiative, like, it has to grab the attention and be really digestible for people who aren't actively engaged, right? Because I, as a person who cares about this, am happy to sit here and read like a massive document about all the things. Like, I want to know that, but the 18,000 other students who aren't engaged in the space on a day-to-day basis don't necessarily want to know that. And so a question that MC and I, and Venela as well, kind of have been continually asking ourselves, and that I think would be helpful here, is to ask, how do we get those kids to care? And I guess in this situation, it's not just kids, it's faculty and staff and this town of Chapel Hill and everyone, but from the student perspective, that's the language. But yeah, that question I think is important.
Nathaniel, do you go by Nate, Nathaniel?
Most people end up calling me Nate, but Nathaniel is fine. I just don't like Nathan. That's my only thing.
Okay. I was going to say, I think building off of that idea is part of why it's so important, Mike, that you're a part of the Chancellor's Cabinet, because what that enables us to do is to make these efforts integral to, they're not an extra thing that's outside, but once they become central to the functioning, then I think that that's such a huge advancement. So it's really important.
You know, getting to Nathaniel's point, I think we want to be politically neutral with this. The SDGs are not viewed as politically neutral in some respects, so that's why you want to be very cautious with some of that language. And I also think, look, as one of the people who was in the UN negotiating those SDGs, especially on water, they have the lowest common denominator. And I'm not sure they set the right vision for where we want to go. We can be much better than that. We can be more progressive than that. And I think the way we can engage the private sector and the solutions that we're bringing to bear can be a lot, can go further than what the SDGs allow us.
Thank you, Erin. That's awesome.
So this is Jonah. Sorry, I had to switch to phone. I'm having internet issues. One thing that I was thinking about just as this conversation is thinking long-term about our audience. I mean, I think it's really encouraging that, given the budget situation that the university's in, the chancellor still, formed this committee, wants us to be ambitious, but I think that we should also frame this, frame the why around, how we're going to need to be making the argument when we come up with recommendations. And I'm not sure that the Sustainable Development Goals help as some of the context for the why, but I think bringing it home to UNC and to North Carolina, and to, starting off recognizing that there's going to eventually need to be a budget argument made for why to make some of the choices that we're going to recommend. I think that we should front load that into the document that we're producing here.
Yeah, thank you, Jonas. That's great points. Okay, so sorry, I was making some notes. All right, so does anyone else have ideas? This has been incredibly helpful. I didn't know that the SDG was going to be an icebreaker conversation starter that we were going to reject, but it's been great because everybody's ideas around it have brought us to new, fresh things that I like Aaron's approach. It's going to be much better than the UN. So it's our motto, by the way, much better than the UN. So, all right, anybody else have other thoughts around that in terms of just ideas? I mean, I get it. I've looked through it, but I haven't looked through it super duper carefully either. I'm familiar with it. My thought would be if others don't have things they'd like to talk about substantively, that I'll go back into it, and I have Steve Wall full credit for winnowing it down to where it is from what it was, which was a lot longer than 62 pages. I do think that as this is an update, there's some need for that encyclopedic accounting of what we've done, but it's going to go to the end and be in an appendix. And so my thought would be that we could start internally and retool it and try and make it more of a statement of our group's vision for the future with a little bit of reference to what's ongoing and what we're going to be building on, and then a reflection of what's happened in the past, but have that all be in an appendix. Have punchy one-pagers for, I'll stop saying punchy, I think that's sort of glib, but you know what I mean. we want it to appeal to the people that Nate knows and I know who have not yet bought in, but we also need it to be substantive and robust, because that reflects where we are. We're ready to do exciting things. So we can get started on that and redistribute it to the group. If anyone is feeling exceptionally wanting to write part of a document or to provide ideas for what might be good front material, more simplified. I mean, I love Aaron Salzberg's really simple social, economic, environmental as the pillars. But if people have other more just other ideas, I think that's a great idea and really captures it. But we couldn't get started and then redistribute it to the group. This feels like maybe what we envision, where we all react to it and then we'll make some steps forward, and then everyone who wants to make substantive additions, well, I mean, typing additions, all of you have made substantive additions today, it will have an opportunity. But that way, I think we can move forward, and it'll be great to early in the calendar year. I just think I'd love to keep our momentum and the traction we've developed. So just to put it on the table, I'd like to get this document out early in the year. And then if it becomes possible, and this is obviously remains to be seen because we haven't even shared a draft yet, have some sort of a climate action plan for which there's some preceding information out there. Have that climate action plan ready to go for Earth Day, which would be delightful to have had that kind of progress. In terms of documents and big foundational things, to do that in a year, I think would be really great. But I recognize that's aspirational. So does that sound like a reasonable starting place? We'll circle back to the document. I've got good notes on everybody's input. Luckily, we're not heavily vested in SDG at all, so we won't have to undo anything, but we will do exactly what folks have described and then send the document back out once everyone's refreshed in the new year. All right, that's the plan. Of course, if you have reactions as we move on to other stuff or afterwards, please send them to me, and we will do just that.
I just have one comment, one question. Sorry to be the annoying Carolina Dining Services fan forever, but I don't think any of the dining stuff is in. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think that's something, our last formal, open discussion is our last formal thing, but our last item is talking about committee structures. Mm-hmm. And that came up there for me as well. Like, food issues aren't waste issues and aren't, they don't, no matter how we think about it, even if we look at the old 3 zeros or we look at the new committee framework with whatever it is, innovation, integration, tracking progress and communication, like that. I think, anyway, I'd like to talk a little more about those, but that's a really important one that I want to be sure we keep, because there's so much neat work going on. They seem really interested in continuing to do cool stuff. And so I think that would be I agree that needs to be captured somewhere. So if we have to modify the framework a little, we can, but, and I don't know, I mean, is food, is it a separate section? Do you have any, Jeff, how did you deal with it at Davidson?
First of all, I absolutely am behind Aaron's statements about the 3 pillars and business to triple bottom line. What we did in food was, and the reason I say that is because we basically tried to use communications aspects of different stakeholder groups to talk about the social, environmental, and economic aspects of food throughout their entire life cycle. So full life cycle sustainability assessment rather than just the LCA. And social is understandably harder sometimes to put data around, but we always kept everything very closely linked along those 3 pillars, because we didn't want people to see them as separate accounting lines kind of thing. The idea is we can get more return on our sustainability return on our investment by taking into account all 3 aspects at all times. And so we started with people where they were, which was their plate. And then we took them either to, they could get involved, whether it's about the surrounding community or communities they grew up in, especially if they come from high agriculture communities, to gardeners and composts and how we use that on campus, to sports. And we really engaged all of our student athletes. We had a student athlete sustainability council and with a member from each team. And that was really helpful. We created competitions around it for that stakeholder group that's interested in competition and would get them riled up. And those were the ways that we connected them. So we incorporated food with energy on campus and talking about greenhouse gas emissions and regenerative agriculture and so on and so forth. And then food waste with the waste on campus, and tried to keep it connected all the way through rather than separate.
Got it. Well, Elizabeth, your point is a great one, and we won't lose it. So we'll find a way to make it work. Aaron.
Well, Mike, maybe this, and Jeff's point kind of reminded me, and Steve, thanks for putting all this together, but I wonder where the vision is. And in each one of these separate elements, I wonder if we can go back and maybe think a little bit about, and this is the one part of the SDGs we can keep, what's the future we want? What does the university look like when we've achieved this? And somehow I wonder whether or not in each one of these individual sections, having that, a single sentence vision goal for what we're after. And then I think it's a lot easier for us to say, here's the goal, here's the approach, here's progress to date, and break that all into one single page that allows us to simply say in each one of these areas, here's where we are. But I just wonder about that, because when I read through it, I really struggled to find out what's our vision, what's or subvisions as they're laid out in the document.
Yeah, I totally agree. And forgive me, because it just occurred to me that I don't know if I shared our draft vision, mission, and goals with everybody, which is a giant miss on my part, but I will email it to you, not put it in the teams. It is very general. It was just, in the beginning, what's your vision for these great people who are going to help the university? How are we going to help organize the council's work? But I think that's a great point, Aaron, because we could have a set, the core set, and then that would break out into the individual sections. And I think that's a great way to keep the eye on future and the eye on activity, and really organize it as a whole, and then within the individual sectors. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I'll be frank, the vision, mission, and goals that I put together early on were more about the council than they were about. So it's less of a miss on my part. I'm still sorry I didn't put them in the teams, and I will, but I don't think, it's not like we're going to cut and paste it. So I think it's reasonable and it can be helpful, but I think that what Aaron's referring to that will be helpful as just the spine of this document is a mission, vision, and goals for what we want, how we want the university to look from a sustainability lens, and what does that mean within these different sectors.
I think that helps us to keep open to, so that we don't end up like continuously drilling down to add more like topics and themes and areas, right? If we have the overarching mission, then it helps us to focus on that through multiple venues rather than saying, no, but we forgot food. We have to add that in, right? Doing that.
I want to respond to the vision point, but I also want to quickly point out that at some point, just vouching for MC, Venela's name is still on the list of members and MC's name is not on the document, which is just a nitpick that I noticed when I was scrolling through that I wanted to point out. Just to, from a
forgive me, I think I corrected some, but not all.
Yeah, it'll definitely will take time to sort of notice all the spaces.
What one are you looking at, just so I can be sure I get it?
Yes, it is on the 4th page when it's just the list of the Sustainability Council members.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. But then as far as vision goes, I think that's a really great point, and I think visioning is really useful as well in allowing us to sort of empathize and put ourselves in the shoes of the people who I've like called the people who don't care. But like to Jeff's point about doing competitions for student athletes, getting in like looking at the various stakeholder groups who are all gonna kind of need to be appealed to in different ways to get on board. I think having a vision and then saying, how does X, Y, or Z fit into this vision is really important in allowing us to sort of empathize, might be too nice a word, but sort of put yourself into another perspective when kind of making these documents and all of that. So I'm pro visioning is the moral of the story.
Check.
I'd also like to just comment on the importance of visioning. I was honestly just reading about this in a different context, but visioning processes like these also help with identity formation. And so I think it'll help create, like our council's outward facing like identity, along with, helping for the buy-in for folks. Because once they can, see the vision that we're working for, then they can identify it with UNC, and then it becomes kind of one and the same. And that's usually helpful for, folks to do whatever the activities are that are encouraged by the visioning process. So like Nathaniel said, I'm also pro visioning.
Thank you, Diamond. That's incredibly helpful. All right, sorry, I was taking notes. I gotta write faster. All right, anyone else? Well, thank you all very much. This has been exceptionally helpful. I think it's not going to be an overnight process, but I think that we are well on our way to a document that will reflect what we want it to reflect, which is all of our priorities and all of our vision for what our organization is. And I think that's critically important, is defining who we are and what we want to be so that people can get on board. All right, just look at the clock. The last thing that I had on the agenda was committee structure. And we don't have to resolve this today, but in the interim, since our last meeting, as I've had the meetings I've described and the interactions I've told you about and talked with lots of you a lot, I've thought more and more about the way that I originally proposed the committees to be structured, which felt very action-oriented and felt like it would be a good integrative piece for the council. But I also have come to think that it may end up dividing important experts and issues into buckets that won't be helpful. And these committees are not going to be silos. It's not going to break us into pieces. But one thought I had was, should it just be energy, water, and greenhouse gases, or something like that, and communications, which I think probably needs to stand on its own? Or do people like these action-oriented innovation, progress, synergy, and communication. Don't have to answer it now, but please think about it.
I think I prefer the structure that you've laid out to the thematic structure, because I think that there's such a high risk of siloing. I think Jeff's example of the way he was talking about the business school efforts and how integrated everything became is exciting. So I think that's a great example of how the 4 areas that you've laid out: innovation, synergy, communications, metrics, or something along those lines. I think they'll allow us to talk across the thematic areas and to share topical expertise, to cross over topical expertise, to create a really generative conversation across campus, and to be really in communication with each other in ways that we otherwise would not.
I agree. I think you run the risk of having the water people do the water thing and the energy people do the energy thing, and then all of a sudden it's kind of what is different about this that we aren't otherwise doing. But that's just my 2 cents.
I'd be curious to Jeff. I mean, Jeff, is there another way we could slice this around production, consumption, and waste?
There are, to answer the question, but
I'm sure.
But I get worried when I've done consulting, for example. I don't like it when I have to deal with that situation, because so often the production side is more integrated with the waste and energy use and purchasing and the entire life cycle of everything that's coming through. And each thing has energy, water, social and community impacts that are part of it. And so I like that. I'm not as much for the thematic or the kind of spot in the assembly line kind of idea, just because it's harder, for example, to try to create a circular economy if production is separated from waste, for example, right? And so that would be my first reaction to that. So right. I think the systems approach is something that, especially with a campus, can work really well, because we'll find opportunities we would never find if we worked in silos, or if we worked in one aspect and didn't kind of look at innovation across all of those things, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I just don't know whether or not that systems approach, looking at water, energy that way versus looking at how do we achieve efficiencies in production, how do we reduce consumption, how do we better manage waste, and look at that systematically, might be a different rubric. But
it would be. When I've worked with companies on it, we have a systems approach, and then the people who are really run all of the energy management systems, for example, then figure out efficiencies versus overall impact based on the systems model that came from the team as a whole, right? So yeah, I'll spare examples, but I'm happy to give examples of that later on.
Great, thank you. That is very helpful. I'm not sure, but I think I probably was doing something late at night and thought, this feels confusing. And I think perhaps it's just, I really like the original setup. We can tweak it, but I do think it will prevent us from immediately siloing. And thank you again. This has been really valuable discussion for me. All right, we'll circle back to that next meeting. I think I will begin the process of getting us thinking about how we're going to staff these committees. And I think a lot of it will be an open call to the university community to say, hey, who would like to participate on these committees? But some of it, of course, will be a little more targeted and making sure that we're targeting the representation we think we need. All right, well, I'm sorry to say we have 1 minute for open discussion, but we have had good open discussion all along the way. And I really want to value everybody's time, particularly here at the finish line in a difficult semester. So if anybody have last things they'd like, parting shots, final comments? Elizabeth?
I'm just thinking of picking up Erin's idea about the visioning and thinking about the vision for each of the 4 subgroups.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have an overarching vision, that might really help to think about like what each of those is doing and how the topics connect and how they how we communicate across those 4 committee areas.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be another place where vision, mission, goals are useful, and having something that's specific to each one of those 4.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think we're getting to the point now where I'm not sure what the efficient path forward is. So like I can create drafts of these and everyone can react to them. I think maybe that's the best way, because it's easier to react than it is to maybe sit down and start. But I don't want to be presumptive and think that I know what the first draft should look like. So maybe, yeah. And I guess that is not necessary. I do think it would be important. It would be valuable for the update document, but no, it's really important, the update document. So, all right.
Or it might be that the update document lays out that each of that's part of the work of those committees to develop that. And then that some of the really early investment could be like having, I know like budget's going to be tight and all of those things, but having a facilitator to work through those groups and do some,
No, I love that. That's a good idea, because of course the group should have their own vision.
One thing quickly with the systems approach that I found really successful is when people in a team like this that are covering highly multidisciplinary, multifunctional, transdisciplinary, transfunctional topics, is people working kind of 70% on one committee and then 30% supporting 2 others, meaning that you have this constant conversation and realization of what others are talking about. And it really helps, and not just the innovation process, but then the implementation process as well.
Yeah, thank you. All right, others? Thank you all again. It is 3:02. I would say we're within the bounds of our 1-hour meeting. And I really, really, really appreciate everyone being a part of this group and your thoughts and your ideas. And I'm excited, and I'll rein in my wanting to have certain things done by certain days and balance it with making it all be just exactly what it needs to be. So thank you again. I hope everybody has a fantastic break. Do not hesitate to reach out if you have any ideas around any of this, and we'll hit the ground running in the new year, hopefully with a handful of new exciting accomplishments. Thank you all.
Mike, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mike.
Happy holidays.
Stay happy, healthy, and safe.
Everybody.